Okay. So unusually for someone who works in market research, I'm not going to show you any slides with bar charts on, so you're going to have to concentrate on what I say. But it'll be a blessing because I won't quote that many numbers at you, but hopefully it will still be interesting. And I just have one slide, which is one image. So if you want to rest your eyes, you can focus on that for a second. And I'm going to be talking today briefly about getting gender right. And I'm going to be talking about three aspects, really. One is advertising, marketing and communications, and some research we've done into that. The other one is perceptions of men and women in leadership positions in G7, some research we've done into that, which I think you'll find quite fascinating. And I'm just going to touch right at the end on what we can all do as part of our everyday jobs. It's not just abstract. This is stuff that we can all work on. I'm not going to go into any detail. There aren't any charts, but the research that I quote is all online if you just Google Kantar plus whatever the research name is. So you will find it. So I'm going to start talking first about some research we did earlier on this year, which was actually called Getting Gender Right. Global piece of research, and it was a meta-analysis of all of our media effectiveness studies, whether it's creative work, media campaigns, and all sorts of different campaigns we've done for different clients all around the world. And we did something very simple, which was we analysed all the responses by what men said and what women said, because in surveys, that's currently how you ask the question. And we also asked a whole load of marketers, like professional marketers, mainly from big brands and publisher-type companies, what they thought as well about the work they were doing. And we found some gaps in understanding and perception, which probably won't be that surprising to you. But we found that 80% of marketers, so 4 in 5 of the marketers that we spoke to globally, said that they were doing a pretty good job in avoiding gender stereotypes. They were, patting themselves on the back. They were very happy. However, if you speak to consumers, about 44% of men and women thought they were being portrayed inappropriately in advertising. And that's men and women, by the way, not just women. And obviously, we do a lot of work with UN Women, the Unstereotype Alliance. There are various organisations to support, the improvement of communications. But that is quite a big gap, and it's quite a big problem. There's a reason why this is really important. One reason is because it's, socially progressive and probably the right thing to do in many people's minds. But there's another reason as well, is that brands that get gender right actually are more valuable. So you might have heard of our Brand Z research, which we release in lots of different countries every year and globally as well. And we did a big analysis of thousands and thousands of data points, which showed that brands which are male skewed, like appeal more to men, this is based on consumer research, are actually overall $9 billion less valuable than those that get a gender balance. So if you're setting up a new company, by all means, go for your target audience, do one thing and do it really well. But actually, if you want to drive big growth and value, you better be balanced and appeal to a broad range of people. The other thing I'm going to mention within this is it's not just about how people are depicted in advertising and communications. It's also about how targeting works. So you've probably heard of media agencies, big media agencies, they buy and plan all the media. And we did an analysis of some of our creative database, our link database. We've tested thousands of ads all around the world. In that, we asked the clients who they're targeting with the ads. Okay, so I'm going to start with baby products. Okay, 98% of campaigns using baby products are targeted solely at women. Okay, so men get the 2%. Laundry products, 98%. Household cleaning, any guesses? 10%. Yeah, 98%. So it's just how it worked. And that's why I've shown you this picture actually on the screen as well, because it's an advert that was that has been released in India by Ariel called Share the Load, which is about a mother remembering that she has to teach her son how to do the laundry, otherwise she's always going to do it for him, which is actually quite an interesting way of looking at the problem. And actually, when I saw it reminded me why my son was sending me text messages from university saying, how do I do my washing? It's like, because I've been doing it for him. Obviously, I should know these things. I should tell him. So we do need to share the load. If you look at other parts of products like cars and things like that, then they are slightly less targeted. They have less of a sort of targeting bias. But I think even media agencies, we have to remember this, have a very oversimplistic and possibly outdated view of how products and services should be targeted. Of course, there will always be some exceptions, like sanitary products. I kind of get that you have to probably primarily target those at women. But we just have to think more broadly, I think, about what we do. If you look at some recent ads, some big brands are taking big strides now in trying to push gender progressiveness as part of their purpose in their communications. So a lot of you might have seen the Nike ad, Dream Crazier, a whole load of women, including Serena Williams, all sort of pushing the boundaries, doing things that they were told they couldn't do. And there's the very recent ad, which was also quite controversial, the Gillette ad, which was actually released on YouTube before it went on paid-for TV, which showed a vision of toxic masculinity and how men needed to think about how they behave, which was actually very controversial and divisive. But in the end, Gillette took that risk, and it was a knowing risk, and actually they have sold more products off the back of it. But why is all this stuff so hard? It shouldn't be that hard, because for many of us, you think, well, actually, it's really obvious that you don't want to upset people, you don't want to offend people, you've got to treat people equally. But we think there's many reasons for this. Most of them are sort of institutional in the sense that that's how people have thought for years. It's the obvious way forward. You have to check your unconscious bias every time you make a decision in a communication. And that includes how marketing teams are made up, who constitutes the marketing team, who do you employ as an agency, whether it's a creative agency or a media agency, what film director do you use? If you're making a big TV ad, for example, they might have a vision of the world which just, is biased in some way. And corporate culture, more generally, I think, actually doesn't help us make changes. So, if you're doing anything that's very different or progressive, you usually have to have a fight with somebody, and that's not very pleasant. But there's some other clues that we got out of our research, which is about how we can actually move things forward rather than just complaining about it. One of which is we looked at what characteristics of ads people like, and we looked at all advertising. It wasn't just telly, it was print and it was radio, it was all the channels, cinema, online. And the characteristic that comes out top in all advertising for men and women, but even more so for women, is actually humour. And so then we looked at our database, because obviously we've got these thousands of ads that we can go back and look at again. And we found that ads actually with women that feature women in use humour less. So that's counterintuitive. That's not what people should be doing. So 22% of ads that feature women use humour, but 51% of ads that feature men. So there's a humour gap there going on as well. And there's of organisations working on this, looking at how you can get better humour written that appeals to women as well as men. And there's kind of lectures, there's training programs going on within agencies. So humour is really important, and I think that's it's actually a relief, because we all like an ad when it's funny, and even some of the most serious topics can be treated in a humorous way. Plus, it makes them memorable, which makes advertising work. So I'm going to move on now to sort of companies, institutions, etc., and some of the research we've been doing there. I spoke about agencies and clients, and I would like to point out one of our clients. I'm sure many of you have heard of Diageo, the company that produces, they make drinks. A big holding company with global reach, and they've done a lot in terms of how they work with their agencies. So when they speak to their agencies, they say, we want to make sure we have a balanced team with, a diverse and gender balanced team. We want to make sure that if you're putting film directors on the list of people who are going to make it, we want to include at least one woman. So they're starting to make demands on their supply chain so they can get their communications right. And in creative testing, one of the things that we've built in is something called the gender equality measure, which is consumers' perceptions of whether they're being represented in the right kind of way. So there are ways that you can make this quantitative and make it progressive. And lastly, on that point, digital ads work less well amongst women as well. And if you think about it, this is actually fascinating. The language of advertising and marketing has always been very sort of war-like. There's a campaign and you're going to target people and there's going to be a pop-up and all these things. And you just think, actually, all of the interruptive kind of formats that you get on digital, the clutter, annoy people generally, but actually they annoy women even more. So that's something to bear in mind. If you're doing anything on digital, use formats that people are more receptive to. And I think it's no coincidence that you start to see things like influencer marketing taking a much greater share, certainly in some categories, like beauty, for example, or fitness. And I'm going to move on, as I said, to something we did in collaboration called the Reykjavik Index, which was launched earlier on this year. A repeated piece of work. It's going to be annual. And this is people's perception in G7 countries of male and females in leadership positions, not just in corporations, but also in government organizations as well. And it's quite interesting that more women in G7 countries think that men and women are equally suitable for leadership roles. This is looking at top leadership roles. And men and women are most closely aligned in their views in the UK, out of the G7 countries. And they're least closely aligned, in fact, in Germany. So there's a big gap in perception about what men think about men or women in leadership roles. The sectors which are quite interesting to look at, where there's better perception of men and women in leadership roles, are media, entertainment, some STEM jobs as well, and actually finance. But the perceptions of men and women in leadership roles are very divided in childcare, fashion, and police, for example. So this does speak to possibly prejudice, possibly some wider issues here. And I'll just cite one fact from Germany, that in Germany, 1/4 of people think that a woman can be head of government. Right, so that just shows you, what a female leader of a government might be dealing with there, because there's a strong negative perception of how this can work. So I think we do need to monitor progress. If you Google leader, for example, it just comes up with a whole picture of men. So even the algorithm is biased as well. And finally, I'm coming to what you can do. So I think, you're all communications professionals. This is what you do every day as part of your job. You need to think about this, as we do every day, like what images are you using? What words are you picking? Every act, every single thing you do is deliberate, and it says something about how you think. So you might need to check yourself occasionally. Are you saying what you mean to, or are you just thinking from your own point of view? How you target your communications. You heard my exaggerated examples earlier, but maybe it's not what you think. So constantly question things. And then finally, internally, as many of us do within our corporations or our organizations, think about how you hire people and who you're promoting as well. And then last but not least, the only other thing, and I would say this, wouldn't I, is I would always advocate measuring things, because otherwise, how do you know if you're making any progress at all? Thank you.